I can start talking. Hello friends, welcome back to yet another Facebook live session brought to you by the JEE team here at BYJU'S. Now today's is a mathematics session. Today's session focuses on coordinate geometry. Now in the previous sessions that we have organized from the maths team here, I have given you insights on preparing for the JEE examination from topics of calculus, trigonometry, algebra, probability and everything else but coordinate geometry. So this will be the final session in this JEE series of sessions that we are organizing, and it is going to focus on a unit which is of extreme importance. Now, if you remember in the very first session on calculus, I had told you that calculus is the single most important section for the examination. Now, the second most important section for the examination would be coordinate geometry. Now, why is coordinate geometry so important? The reason is very simple. It fetches a lot of questions in the examinations. Now, in the past 5 years, every year, coordinate geometry has fetched about 7 to 8 questions in the main examination. Given that 30 questions come in the main examination, 7 to 8 is quite a big number. Again, in the advanced examination, every year, consistently, there have been 6 to 8 questions. So, coordinate geometry is quite an important section. Now, if I have to pick 1 or 2 chapters from coordinate geometry, which have all the questions from our Parabola and three-dimensional geometry. Now, Parabola is the single most important chapter across mathematics. Like definite integration, Parabola also definitely fetches 2 to 3 questions in both the main and the advanced examinations. So is the case with three-dimensional geometry. Three-dimensional geometry also consistently will give you marks in both your main and advanced examination. Now, there is a catch with coordinate geometry. Those of you who are aiming at the main examination, by looking at the syllabus, that is, you have to look beyond CBSE books. And this is exactly where BYJU'S the Learning App will come into your help, because in our videos, the tutors have explained these concepts in great detail, and we have covered extremely complex topics also in the easiest possible way. Those of you who do not have our app can download the app from the link which is given in this video and look at the videos and get a wonderful experience of coordinate geometry. Now let's directly dive into the chapters. We have 6 chapters in coordinate geometry: straight lines, circles, parabola, ellipse and hyperbola, vectors and three-dimensional geometry. So, beginning with straight lines, this is the first chapter of coordinate geometry in your 11th standard. Now, this chapter is of extreme relevance, not because it fetches a lot of questions, but because this is the chapter which introduces you to tackle coordinate geometry. For the first time ever, you will be understanding the equation of curves. Now, in straight lines, we look at the different forms of equations of a straight line. We understand the concept of slope. We understand the concepts of how do we write equations for curves passing through certain points which are inclined at a certain angle to the coordinate axis, etc. Now, in the past 4 or 5 years, straight lines has fetched 1 question definitely in the main examination. In the advanced examination, well, questions do not normally appear every year in the advanced examination from straight lines. The questions are quite intermittent. They might appear 1 year, might not come another year. But it is very important to understand how do they build coordinate geometry in straight lines, because this is the chapter where coordinate geometry, you get the feel of coordinate geometry. So the most important topic from straight lines would be pair of straight lines. Now again, CBSE textbooks speak nothing about pair of straight lines or family of straight lines, and this is exactly where you have to look beyond CBSE textbooks and try and understand concepts which are of importance from your JEE main and advanced examination point of view. Let's move on to the next chapter. The next chapter is circles. Now, this is a very vast chapter. Number of topics are covered here. We have the equation of a circle with its center at the origin. So equation of a circle with a center at h, k, equation of a circle in a parametric form, and so forth. There are a number of topics which are related to equation of circle itself. Then we look at normal to a circle, tangent to a circle, condition for a line to be a normal to a or tangent to a circle, and so forth. Now, these are all topics that are there in CBSE. But these are topics from which some of the question in circles come from, but there are a number of topics which are beyond CBSE from which a lot of questions come in the main and advanced examination. These topics include director circle, equation of chord of contact, length of chord of contact, or equation of a polar, what is pole of a circle, and all these concepts. So for these concepts, you have to look beyond CBSE. Now, circles is again a very important chapter because every year in the main examination, one question has definitely appeared from circles. In the advanced examination in 2016, 2 questions came from circle, and both of these were multiple correct answer kind of problems. So it's again very important that you understand circles very well because a number of new concepts such as tangents, normals, chords are introduced in circles which you've never seen before. So circles again is a build on from straight lines. You look at a different kind of a curve, and then you look at how does a circle and a line interact. When is a line a tangent? When is it a chord? When is it a normal, etc. Now, if there's one topic, one concept which you have to pick from circle and say this is the most important concept which will find application in most of the questions, is the fact that a tangent is perpendicular to the radius. Now, the distance of the center of a circle from the tangent is always equal to the radius is going to help you everywhere. Every time you have a question which says a line touches a circle, you have to understand that at some point or the other, I have to make use of this fact that this line is at a distance of radius from the center of the circle. This is the most important concept from the chapter on circles, which will find application again and again in the chapter on parabola and ellipse and hyperbola as well. After circles, we begin with conic sections. Now, conic sections are introduced for the first time in 11th standard. Previously, you knew what a circle was. You knew what a straight line was. All these concepts, though not in terms of equations, but yet you are familiar with these concepts. But conic sections, well, you had no idea that a curve called a parabola exists. For the first time that you heard was probably when projectile motion was introduced in 11th standard. They said that the projectile motion follows a parabolic path. You were like, what's a parabola now? So anyway, moving on. So parabola is the single most important chapter of mathematics. Number of questions come from parabola in main and advanced examination. Every year you can expect 2 questions at least from parabola, and even questions which come from ellipse and hyperbola will have some relation to parabola. So parabola is an extensive chapter and you really have to focus on things outside CBSE here. I've been telling this again and again and again. That is to bring home the fact that CBSE textbooks are not sufficient to study coordinate geometry for your JEE main or advanced examination. With the case of parabola, one of the things which is missing from the CBSE textbook is the parametric representation of a parabola. And believe me, if there's one topic which is of very, very importance from parabola, it is going to be parametric representation of a parabola. Every problem from parabola can be solved very easily if you try and solve the problem in the parametric form and not in its standard form. Again, shifted rotated parabolas are important. You are not supposed to overlook these topics. Do not focus only on the standard y square is equal to 4ax parabola. Look at shifted rotated parabolas, understand their properties, and understand the definition of a lot of terms such as eccentricity, focus, directrix, etc. All these are introduced for the first time in this particular chapter. So after this, there are 3 more chapters from coordinate geometry which are of importance. But as I always follow in my sessions, I'm going to take a small break here. I am going to now pick up a few questions. It's time for a few questions. It's time to answer the questions from my viewers. So the first question here is going to be from Aditya. The question is that what is the single most important thing to remember in the chapter on parabola? Well, I've answered your question just now, Aditya. I have told you that the single most important topic from parabola is parametric representation of parabola. You have to understand how do you represent a parabola in its parametric coordinates, because only if you can represent a parabola in its parametric form can you solve a lot of problems. It's very important to understand this point. The next question that we have is from Khan Shahanazab from the chapter on circles. Now he asks us, how important are concepts such as director circle, radical axis, polar and pole of a circle? Now, I understand where is this question coming from. The question is coming from the fact that these are not concepts that are covered in the CBSE syllabus. These are concepts beyond CBSE. So a number of students are not actually aware of these concepts. But believe me, this is a very important concept. Be it director circle, be it radical axis, be it the pole and polar, questions sometimes come from these concepts. Now, what is also of relevance is the fact that these topics which he speaks about from the chapter on circle are not restricted to circles itself, these concepts will find application in the next chapters, which are on ellipse and hyperbola. We also have polar and pole for a hyperbola, for an ellipse, for a parabola. So all these concepts, once learned in the chapter on circles, are just an extension in the rest of the chapters. So these concepts are definitely important, and hence we need to understand these concepts. Now there's yet another question which comes from Sona, and she asks, would you please explain parabola from the conic the chapter on conic section with a problem? Now this is a very interesting question, but Sona, we have just half an hour here, and this is not the time to explain concepts, and that has been done wonderfully well in our app. You can download our app, you can subscribe to the 11th standard, 12th standard material, go through our videos, because our videos are extremely wonderful and they have explained concepts in the most beautiful way, and a lot of problems have been solved. Recently, we are coming up with an addition of the JEE module to our app. So very soon you'll be able to see the JEE questions also are tackled in our app. So we will explain the concepts of parabola using examples in our app, and unfortunately I can't do it in this session because I just have another 10-15 minutes and I have 3 more chapters to cover. So I'm going to move on with the discussion on coordinate geometry, and I'll answer the rest of your questions at the end of this session. Ellipse and hyperbola. Well, once you have mastered parabola, ellipse and hyperbola is a walk in the park, because ellipse and hyperbola is going to be nothing new. You're going to see the same set of terms. You're going to look at eccentricity, you're going to look at foci now instead of one focus which a parabola has. Now ellipse and hyperbola have 2 foci and they have 2 directrices. So all these things are just going to multiply in number, but their definitions are all going to stay the same. So the trend is going to be the same in ellipse and hyperbola as well. You begin by looking at what is the definition of these conic sections, and then you look at the definition of all these terms, you look at latus rectum and all these things, and then you move on to solving problems. And when it comes to problems, you're going to look at equation of a normal, equation of a tangent, condition for a line to be a tangent to an ellipse, to a tangent to a hyperbola, etc. And again, there are parametric representation of ellipse and hyperbola as well. But I say that ellipse and hyperbola do not demand as much parametric representation as parabola, because the questions which come in the JEE examination from ellipse and hyperbola are not that complicated. When it comes to parabola, they always go for the shifted, rotated form of a parabola. They hardly ask you the standard parabola. Whereas when it comes to ellipse and hyperbola, the examiners are a little more kind. They ask you questions based on hyperbola and ellipse, which are in their standard form, which have their axis aligned to the coordinate axis and which have the center at the origin. Ellipse and hyperbola and parabola fetch a lot of questions. I've told you that in the main examination, every year 2 questions come from the concepts of parabola, and in the advanced examination also generally 2 questions come from parabola. Whereas ellipse and hyperbola, the questions are less frequent. For example, in the main examination, 1 year a question might come from ellipse, 1 year from hyperbola, and so forth. There might be a year when, the questioners decide that, okay, we're going to give 3 questions from parabola and nothing from ellipse and hyperbola. So parabola is very crucial, and if you understand parabola very well, ellipse and hyperbola are really easy to understand. So we've now looked at straight lines, we've now looked at circles and the conic sections. Now we move on to 12th standard chapters. The chapters in 12th standard, well, vectors is very strictly speaking not a coordinate geometry chapter, but I'm going to include vectors here because I could not include it in any of the previous talks that I've given. So I'm going to start in the 12th standard discussion on coordinate geometry by including vectors, which are strictly speaking not coordinate geometry chapters. But then vectors are not new, right? Because even though in 12th standard, from a mathematical point of view, vectors are introduced in the 12th standard, you're not strangers to the concepts of vectors, because vectors form the basis of your physics study. The very first chapter in physics in your 11th standard is vectors. So concepts such as scalar product, vector product, triple product, etc. have been introduced well in advance before you come to across this mathematics chapter on vectors. Now, vectors again does not fetch questions every year. In the main examination, 1 or 2 questions sometimes come, sometimes don't come. In the advanced examination, for example, 2014 and 13 did not see any questions from vectors. The rest of the 3 years, 17, 16 and 15 had 1 question from vector. The most important topic, if you ask me, from vectors would be triple products, because in physics you've seen a lot of scalar products and vector products, but triple products do not appear so much in physics. So triple product is a concept which might be tested more rigorously in mathematics than in physics. So pay attention to vector products. The last chapter with which we conclude this session on three-dimensional coordinate geometry is three-dimensional geometry. Now, three-dimensional geometry, just like probability, has two parts. It's introduced in 11th standard and the bulk of the concepts are taught in 12th standard. 11th standard is just to give you a flavor of 3D. They start with distance formula, section formula, which you've seen in 2D, just a direct extension of 2D to 3D. But when it comes to 12th standard, topics become a little more intense. You start with straight lines in a three-dimensional space. You look at equation of a straight line. Before this, you understand concepts such as direction ratios, direction cosines, all terms that you've never come across before. And then you move on to planes. Now, planes are a little more complicated. Planes have a lot of properties, a lot of different forms of planes. And also from the JEE Advanced point of view, it is important to look at equation of a sphere. So now it's three-dimensional geometry. The amount of questions that come from three-dimensional geometry are plenty. So in three-dimensional geometry, every year at least 2 questions come. In the main examination, every year 2 questions come from three-dimensional geometry, and in the advanced examination, every year at least 1 question comes, and there have been years when 3 questions have come. So three-dimensional geometry is an interesting topic, a very important topic from examination point of view. Planes are the single most important concept from three-dimensional geometry because planes also include the study of straight lines, because most of the questions would be like a straight line lies on this particular plane and so forth. So a straight line's concepts are embedded in the concept of plane. So summing up coordinate geometry. Now, coordinate geometry is the second most important section of mathematics after calculus. If calculus fetches 30% of the paper, coordinate geometry is very closely behind with about 20 to 25% of the paper. So pay a lot of attention to coordinate geometry. The chapters are quite extensive. The number of concepts are quite extensive, and the number of formulae that you have to remember are quite a lot. Now, with coordinate geometry, everything can be derived, and it is advisable that you derive everything much before you start solving problems. But make sure that you have these derivations so very well embedded in your head that these formulae are known by heart. I say this because if you spend time in the examination deriving formulae, you will not be able to finish coordinate geometry problems because they tend to be very long. An example that I can give you is that for a parabola, if they have given you a chord which is passing through the focus, which is called a focal chord, if they've given you one endpoint of the focal chord in a parametric form, finding the other endpoint should be known by heart. You should know what are the coordinates of the other endpoint of a focal chord, because deriving this is going to take a lot of time, and the question is not going to be to find the other endpoints of the focal chord. It's going to be based on something which has to do with the other end, having to think about how was this formula derived. So this is about coordinate geometry. Problems tend to be lengthy, problems tend to be quite messy because you have to play with numbers here, and numbers are not easy to play with, many chances of committing errors. So what is required in coordinate geometry is meticulous practice. You have to sit and solve problems again and again and again and again. Only then can you master coordinate geometry and be sure to grab every mark that is on offer from the sections on coordinate geometry. With this, I am going to conclude this session on coordinate geometry, but definitely I have to pick a few questions to answer as well. So do we have any questions from coordinate geometry from our viewers? Of course, one of the comments that has popped up is that there are a number of people who are requesting us to have this session in Hindi. Unfortunately, it's a 20-25 minute long session and it's very difficult to switch between languages. So this is one of the reasons why I have kept this entire session in English. In future, we'll try and keep this in mind and make sure that the sessions happen both in English and Hindi simultaneously. Now, yet another question that has come from one of our viewers is on three-dimensional geometry. Now, this question is, the questioner asks us, how important is the concept of plane and straight line? And I would say this is a very, very important concept. And of course, I've told you that planes is the single most important concept from three-dimensional geometry. And if you completely look at the concept of plane, you would have definitely covered the concept of straight line as well. So these are definitely very important. I'll take a couple of questions which have come from Suraj. Suraj is asking one question, which is auxiliary circle and director circle and subtangent and subnormal. And I've told you all these are very important concepts. This was a question which was asked by another of our viewer. And he's asked me another question, which is, what about rectangular hyperbola? Of course, rectangular hyperbola is an important topic. Asymptotes are also an important topic, but questions are not very frequent from this. Now, the last question that I would like to take is on the books for coordinate geometry. Now, there are plenty of books that are available out in the market for coordinate geometry. One of the books that is my personal favorite is by Tata McGraw-Hill Publications. They have amazing concepts covered in their books, and also nice questions have been covered. Of late, a number of new players are coming into the market. But believe me, more important than books, I would say that you should gain clarity on concepts and you should solve a lot of past year question paper. Now it's already March, it's already February, and in March and April you have your examinations. This is the ideal time to wrap up all your preparations and focus on solving past year question papers, because past year question papers will definitely help you in gaining understanding, in gaining a very good knowledge on what are the kind of questions that are going to appear in the examination. And this knowledge is definitely quite crucial. I hope you had fun in all these sessions that we've organized in giving you insights as to which topic is important from these chapters on mathematics. With this, mostly we are wrapping up this particular series of sessions that was focused on enlightening you about the concepts of mathematics. From now on, the sessions will be exam specific. We will start with the CBSE board examination, questions pertaining to these. Then we'll move on to the IIT main and advanced examination as and when we are approaching these examinations. The sessions now are going to be exam specific and not subject specific. I hope you had fun. If you have any questions, you can write to us here. We will answer your questions. Do not forget to download BYJU'S the learning app if you have not downloaded it, and subscribe to our app, because the content in our app is really amazing and it'll help you a lot in your exam preparations. I hope you have fun. Have a great evening and an amazing weekend ahead, and good luck for the exam season.